Welcome to the Health Science Podcast, sponsored by the National Health Association. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, and I'm absolutely delighted today to have as my guest Dr. Columbus Batiste. Dr. Batiste is the Healthy Heart Doc. He's also a board-trained interventional cardiologist who has really taken the road to really helping people take autonomy for their own health by really emphasizing plant-based nutrition, lifestyle medicine. So welcome, Dr. Batiste. It's such a pleasure to see you again. Welcome to the Health Science Podcast, brought to you by the National Health Association, the oldest organization in the world championing the extraordinary benefits of a whole plant food diet and healthy lifestyle, as well as water-only fasting. We believe that health results from healthful living and focus on evidence-based science that promotes the health of you and your loved ones, as well as the health of all animals and the environment. We feature experts from a cross-section of disciplines within the plant nutrition, vegan, psychological, environmental, and animal compassion sectors. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, the NHA's Director of Health Education.
Hello. It's great to see you again. We met briefly there in, what was it, Michigan, right?
No, we were at the hygiene conference in Cleveland, if you recall, and that
Yes.
that was our first meeting, and it was great. And I love your name. It's kind of got that. It's like springs right from the parishes of New Orleans. You know what I mean?
Oh,
It's
look
amazing.
at that!
It's amazing. Listen, a lot of people have different ways that they kind of segue into getting involved in plant-based nutrition and alternative ways of doing things. And I know sometimes that can be personal health issues, but for you, it was the health issue of some very important family members, your father, your father-in-law, that where you had a kind of a sense of helplessness with all the incredible sophisticated training you had to not really be able to change the path that they were kind of going on, and as you tried to just manage the disease, but could not really get at really helping them that much. Can you tell that story or relate the feelings of all of that for you? Because I think it's important.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you. I think it's important for us to remember individuals who are loved ones who passed away, that we keep their memory alive and discussing them. And so thank you for the opportunity. I'll tell you, the seeds of that were really planted before by my patients. So one of the things that was quite interesting is the fact that after I would perform procedures, the interventions, whatever it may be, they come and they'd see me and they say, "Doc, what should I eat?" And I would say little quips. I had, just you know what, just eat 4 out of 7 days, 4/7 rule. Do well 4 out of 7 days. Just try and eat a little bit better today than you did yesterday. Just all these little quips that I would just say that really meant nothing. They were worthless in terms of the space that they took. And it wasn't, but I started to just search for books, going to Barnes and Nobles, not going to PubMed or looking at research, just looking in general. So that seed was planted early on. And I'll tell you, it was around 2010. Before that, I kind of watched my dad. It's amazing. And, I think my kids will probably witness this with me, hopefully not to the same degree, is that after being separated from my dad by schooling, all of a sudden I saw how much he had aged in front of my eyes. And he was no longer the strong, virile man that I knew from before. And, around the time that I became board, I took over as chief of cardiology. My dad really took a turn downhill. And, I decided to move he and my mom out closer by myself and move into another house and move them into my former house. And I remember my dad loved to dress up as when I was a little boy, always wearing suits, always had his briefcase with him, always a businessman at heart. And the one thing he couldn't do, being a severe diabetic, was put on dress shoes anymore, because because of his inherent peripheral neuropathy, which for those of you out there is that the blood sugar elevations really impact your nerves. They impact your vessels. And then now it impacts the ability of his foot to really flex or to contract. And so he had to wear braces, and he couldn't have none really fit. So I found I'm the son. I'm a board certified cardiologist. I find these perfect shoes that can fit braces, and they custom make these shoes. And so I took him there. He was like a kid in a candy store and was so happy and pleased that I finally bought that he had these shoes and he can get dressed up to go to church or to his meetings. of course, using his walker, still a shell of who he was from before. And I'll tell you that in time, within a matter of months, he developed a blister that blister turned into an ulcer that then kept him from walking ever again in his life. And so you can imagine the weight and the burden of responsibility that I felt inherently being his son. I'll never forget one time sitting inside the kitchen, and my family, I'm the youngest of five or six of us, and my siblings, we joke a lot. And my sister said, "Dad, why are you worried about Columbus here?" Well, he said, "Well, that's my son after all. He's a doctor. He's going to look out for me. He's going to make sure I'm taken care of." And I'll never forget those words as I saw him just spiral down continually and essentially never walked again in his life. And then the day that he passed away it was a horrible day. In all honesty, it was a horrible day. It was a horrible time, that a dark period in my life of trying to come out despite having a young family, a young career in that moment there. But what I can say is that was 9 months after my father-in-law passed away from the ill effects of high blood pressure that then led to kidney failure, and watched him continue to just funnel through this thing called the healthcare system, right? Still given the same sort of foods that propagated his place in this state. And I'll tell you, 2010 was a hard year for my wife and myself, of just this barrage of grief that was there amidst the joy of having a very young family. And so it was because of the seeds that both of our parents implanted in us in terms of resiliency and looking. And I'll tell you, Frank, the one thing is that my dad wasn't a novice. I mean, I think to the average American, he was an extremely healthy person. He owned a health food store back in the 70s. They actually had to stop the health food store because I was the pleasant surprise. And so coming along as a pleasant surprise, my mom, the doctor had extra precautions on my mom. And so they had ended up closing the health food store. But vitamins were galore inside my home. Juicing was galore in my home. And it was almost like this duality of existence. On one hand, my dad loved sweets and pastries and sodas. On the other hand, he would juice and he would have vitamins, and he knew all the latest and did iridology and all these different things in order to make sure he was aware of health. And so it wasn't by chance that I read Caldwell Esselstyn's book. Was probably amongst one of the first that I read. And it was mainly, I remember it because the chapter that read Moderation Kills. Moderation kills. My dad didn't smoke. He didn't drink. He didn't do drugs. He didn't eat excessive amounts of meat. Actually, my mom would make gluten from scratch. They taught cooking classes that were there, but at the same hand, he did have a little bit of meat. He did have a little bit. He had a lot of the other foods that were there, and it brought to my attention the fact that even as I prescribe medications to patients, that there are some patients where a small dose is going to result in horrible adverse effects immediately. There's other patients it's going to take years before those ill effects take place in them, and adverse effects. And so the same with diet. For some people, diet will make an immediate response in their body, and they will manifest and have ill effect immediately. Others, it's going to take decades, and you just never know which way it's going to impact you.
Well,
And
the
that's
other
what.
problem with that is too that sometimes when you make those positive changes, there will be a period of detoxification,
Yes.
cleansing, and healing. And so, unless you're aware that those symptoms and that expression is in your favor, you can almost set up a battle against even those. It looks like this is not working for you. So many times I hear that from people. They'll start something that has tremendous value, but because of those symptoms, and we've all kind of been brought up to fear our own vitality. A lot of those symptoms like fever and elimination, which are approaches of the body to heal, we have been set up to wage battle against or to take some medication for. So sometimes it turns people off from a really good path. So I can resonate exactly with what you're saying.
Yeah, no, and that's very, very, very correct. It's that our society is so into just medicating symptoms. You should never have any symptoms. And that we've done this to such a large degree that we don't know what health really feels like any longer.
Right.
Right? We're so masked in terms of with things.
Well, the sad commentary and is that with the incredible interventional skills, diagnostic tools, emergency care procedures of medicine, which are unbelievable, that the system itself is so mired in just disease care management and medication management that it has been sidetracked from dealing with true causes of disease. And the idea that simple lifestyle changes have profound effects at reversing the most devastating pathologies. You can't quite get right with the idea that that kind of a simplistic approach could somehow trump these incredible interventional procedures. And it's
Yeah.
unfortunate because I know in an interview that I saw with you, you talk about the value that is imposed through the medical training of seeing those things as valueless because it's not preparing someone for the information that they need on a board or to be certified. So it almost devalues the impact of lifestyle medicine in a way. And so
Yeah.
more and more doctors just get sidetracked away from that. And it's sometimes hard to find your way back to understanding the profound simplicity of lifestyle, modification and the impact that it has.
No, and to that point, I think even if we dig a little bit further, I think in a different life, I probably would have been a history professor. I love history. I think it's so vitally important to understand why we're where we're at. And I think when you look at the transformation of the medical education system in the early part of the 20th century with Flexner and the others, that we saw this divergence towards pharmaceuticals and this negating things that we didn't quite understand. And I think that was equally as problematic, that we set ourselves sails down this course of this trajectory in which we have not been able to recover. We have not been able to re-steer this ship back towards saying, you know what, it's not either or. That there is no such thing. I actually disagree, and I actually do not like the terminology
Right.
alternative care at all. Even though I had a cooking session called cooking class called cooking cath lab, cooking alternative to health. I didn't like alternative because alternative implies something inferior. Alternative implies something less than. But every study, every guideline states and starts off by saying lifestyle first, diet, nutrition, exercise, sleep, all these aspects there that we as providers, we skip over and go
Right.
immediately to the medications. Why? Because it's something I can fit into a 10-minute follow-up visit. It's
Right.
something that patients expect they're getting something. It takes the onus and responsibility off of individuals and it places it on a prescription pad of saying simply take this pill 3 times a day and come back and see me in 3 months and keep doing what you're doing. And that's the wrong approach.
It's kind of intriguing. I know you were trained in Loma Linda Med School. I know that's where you got your original medical degree. And I
Yes.
know that you're a practicing Adventist, Seventh-day Adventist too in your family. It's kind of intriguing to me that in even a place like Loma Linda, if you go back, because I know you like history, if you go back into the 19th century when you had a series of health reformers that were revolutionary, and actually Ellen G. White was one of those because
Hmm.
she really felt that the spiritual outcome needed to really take care of the body to be able to take care of mind and spirit. And so she was one of the reformers, along with a whole series of people, including Russell Trawl, Sylvester Graham, that became the foundation of this very organization, the NHA, because those people were operating at a time when fresh fruits and vegetables were banned, fresh air and water were eschewed. People were being blistered and bled and treated with arsenic and mercury. And so people like Ellen White, Sylvester Graham, Russell Trawl, they were the true health reformers in the 19th century. That mentality of lifestyle medicine actually has its roots in the work of those people. And yet, as the medical schools and everything developed, that historical perspective just really got obliterated. And it's
Yes.
fortunate that groups like the NHA, when Herbert Shelton kind of brought all of that knowledge from all of those pioneers and health reformers into this model that he called natural hygiene, which is really just the forerunner to lifestyle medicine, is really what it
Yes.
is. So it's kind of intriguing because there is a historical perspective for all of this, but it got kind
Hmm.
of obliterated in this dance of treatment and intervention, so it's kind of intriguing.
No, absolutely. And the thing is, I'll tell you, I wish I had received training at Loma Linda that went down this road, but actually I did not.
Right.
It was the traditional bread and butter medical education without any inference. The honest truth is, I rounded with individuals who are lead investigators with the Adventist Health Study, and even as a cardiology fellow, and did not really receive any information as it pertains to the value and
Right.
the impact of lifestyle. And so when you look at things like this and this vicious cycle, and I hope and pray that things have really shifted along those lines now in the education, at least there. I know in other places it's beginning slowly and not fast enough for everything as a whole.
I'm here with Dr. Columbus Batiste. We're going to take just a few minutes to hear from our sponsor, the National Health Association. And now, to put a smile on the sponsors of the National Health Association, you're listening to the Health Science Podcast Show. I want to remind you to visit the National Health Association website, where you'll find incredible resources to support your healthy lifestyle, including plant-exclusive eating without added salt, oil, and sugar. Simply go to healthscience.org or nationalhealthassociation.org. Be sure to check out membership, which is $35 per year for those living within the U.S. and $55 for those living outside the U.S. You'll be amazed at all the information and benefits you'll receive. As a member, you're kept up to date on the latest evidence-based tools for health promotion. You'll receive the incomparable quarterly magazine Health Science, a beautiful 40-page advertising-free publication mailed to your home or offices, loaded with articles, recipes, inspirational stories, and interviews with world leaders in the fields of personal health, plant-based nutrition, water-only fasting, animal rights, and environmental support. And you'll receive details about life-changing events, such as the 2023 NHA Conference set for June 23 to the 25th, 2023 in Cleveland, Ohio, which will be the NHA's 75th annual NHA Conference. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, and now back to the show. Welcome back to the Health Science Podcast. I'm here with Dr. Columbus Batiste, the Healthy Heart Doc. Let's talk about that. I know you created this nonprofit that was Healthy Heart Nation, and that you really refer to yourself as Healthy Heart Doc. Talk to me about how that evolved through your crusade of getting more and more connected to lifestyle approach, and what that does and how that operates.
Yeah, I mean, the way I kind of see it, my family loves movies, right? And so the superhero movies and everything else like that. So at heart, I'm probably more of an introvert, which means that my first desire isn't to get out into to just have conversations and to talk and so forth. So even as I started down this road, I said, well, okay, I need to kind of have like something that I'm speaking behind, right? And so that took on the idea of Healthy Heart Doc. I didn't see it, somehow it just came to me. I later figured out that I wasn't alone, that actually Joe Kahn actually had a very similar name, America's Healthy Heart Doc. And by the time I realized that, it had already, it was already out the barn at that point. So I just kept it. But I'll tell you, one of the things that I felt was important was figuring out how could I add anything to this conversation. And the way I see this movement, this issue of lifestyle, is it's very similar to this idea of movies. In movies, oftentimes you have a good guy versus a bad guy. The good guy wins in the end, unless there's a sequel, a part two. Then at which point it may be delayed a little bit. And so you all frame it around the context that's different, whether it's Wonder Woman, Batman, Superman. And so we're all delivering the message slightly different angulation. We're bringing in different components and different aspects of the superpower of lifestyle and how it can impact your body from the brain to the toes. And that's where I realized that there's an important message inside for each of us to deliver, and there's room at the table when we look at the numbers of Americans who can really benefit from this and who need to in order to narrow this thing called the healthcare crisis in America that persists. And so that was really the basis for starting out.
But like our superheroes, they always have a dual identity. So
Yes.
the Superman you are as Healthy Heart Doc, there's a Clark Kent that has to deal with those endpoint patients that don't have a leeway. They need that interventional thing that you do, the very highly skilled training that you've had. So how do you dance with that? How does that work for you? I'm just curious how that plays for you.
Yeah, it's more of an issue of leading with love. It's an issue of moving like a running back through a line that's there. For those of you not familiar with the game of football, a running back is the guy who takes the ball and tries to run through a bunch of people. They're looking for that specific hole. And so I'm looking for that specific opportunity inside of my interaction with the patient to really give them information, not from a stance of beating them up with what they haven't done, but of planting seeds continually. And I'll tell you, I have some patients who come and see me, they know what they're getting when they come to see me and choose to. I've had other patients had no idea, and I'm literally planting seeds. And here's the thing, after years of practice, that it doesn't take root immediately for some patients, but I've had patients come back to me 5, 10 years now later on saying, Doc, you were right. I've had family members coming back to me and saying, Columbus, we used to joke and laugh at you with, all the whole nutrition stuff, but
Right.
you were right. You were right. I didn't beat them up. I didn't crucify them over the concept of what they're doing bad, but I spoke to them about, what do you want? There's 3 W's, right? I love it from Kelly McGonigal's book, Willpower Instinct. 3 W's. What do you want? What are you willing to do to get what you want? And what won't you do to get what you want? Well, it's undeniable. People want health. They want to feel better. They want a better life. Now, the next question is, what are you willing to do and what won't you do? And that's really what I say. I seek it to understand with them. Once we establish that, the question is, how much are you willing to put into it? And I'll support you whatever way I can.
Yeah, that brings up an old quote by Herbert Shelton, one of the founders of this organization, which I love. He said, "You're free to make choices, but you're not free to choose the consequences."
That's right.
And so you got to lock into, and I tell people, just as you're making the point, that, what are the consequences of your choices, and are they congruent with the goals you're trying to achieve? Because if they are, I applaud you. And if they're not, you got to put the big boy pants on, because no one can really do that for you. And I love the way that you really you really do the work of empowering people to be autonomous. That's such an important piece, because there's so much dependency on voices of authority for many of us, and it takes us away from the wisdom and power that operates within each of us, that is so capable of expressing health if we give it the support and the biological requirements that it needs. So I love the work that you do. And with that in mind, let's talk about that, because I love the fact that you link so much body mind stuff in the way you look at healthcare, and a lot of people don't. And that's a very important piece for me. So let's talk about how you trained yourself in the area of stress response management, and how that becomes a part of how you work with the people under your care.
Yeah. No, thank you for that, because it's so important. It really truly is. And it wasn't something that I was taught, but I'll tell you, it's something I observed. You could just see the level of stress on individuals as they come to your office. You look at whether it's financial, it's marital, social, whatever it may be, the stress that's just there. And I'll tell you, I wasn't trained in the idea of broken heart syndrome, but as that really came to just be a major part of my practice, I started really saying, there's an overlap. And as I started to parse through the literature, you saw how much stress, anxiety, depression plays such a substantial role in just the occurrence of cardiovascular events. And I knew I had to take a different approach to really try and address the needs of individuals. The last thing I'll say as it relates to just the process of evolving into it is that on occasion, we see individuals who are staunch with their nutrition, but yet they're so highly stressed and they ignore every other aspect of their life. And it's not, we're a complete individual, we're a complete package. And so we can't take a reductionist approach, even as it relates to the extreme importance of nutrition, and eliminate all the other aspects of our intimacy, of our relationships, our sleep, the rest, the sunlight, the water intake that we need to get, of the exercise, the activity, of all these core components that play a role, each of them integrating with the others,
Right.
which is so powerful. And so that's what really kind of started the whole process of me really working with patients along those lines, collaborating with a psychologist, collaborating with a dietitian.
So you collaborate with psychologists that can actually teach them some of these behavioral modification approaches.
That's
and
correct.
cognitive approaches where they can help themselves. So important. It's so dramatically important. And I agree with you. There was a period in my own practice where I actually stopped talking about nutrition for a period of time, because everyone made everything just that. And I was watching people get anxious and fall apart because they were neglecting these other lifestyle components that you just brought up. So let's let the audience out here know what's the best place to find you online. What's the best place to go to follow you and learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And one of the things I'm trying to do is have more of a presence there. But I'm on Instagram at the Healthy Heart Doc. You can find me on my website, thehealthyheartdoc.org. And one of the
Perfect.
things I didn't have a chance to really address is really the formation of the nonprofit, which was one of the major things that
Yeah, I
took
want you to talk
place.
about that. We got plenty of time for
Yes.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll tell you is that, as I start this work, I tell everyone I have a day job, 9 to 5, and or actually a lot longer than that. And I felt as if I wanted to funnel my efforts to really impacting the community at large. And so that was really the nidus for developing the Healthy Heart Nation. And really, with that concept of, in order for our heart of the community to be healthy, there's all aspects from a business, the education, the all the components of our physical health become extremely important. And so, as a means to impact communities at large, is really to educate, empower, to enact change. We look at things, and not to say that the current state of vegan foods and plant-rich foods is healthy, because it's not, right? But we see such an explosion of all these things in the market now. Well, that didn't happen by chance.
Right.
That happened because the business of business is business. And so, because of the groundswell movement of those who desired those products, that led businesses to do it. And so the point of that is the fact that we can all make a change and demand a change based upon our movement as a group, as a community. And that's what's so important. It's I love the concept when it looks at the forest and the trees, and how if we can learn from trees, right? And they seem as if they're stagnant, they seem as if they're individual, they seem as if they aren't connected at all. But beneath the ground, you have this whole inner working with their roots. They call it the wood wide web that's there, where they're communicating with nutrients back and forth, and minerals and oxygen, letting each other know about dangers, sharing things, allowing trees to grow that otherwise wouldn't, and helping the ones that are the least able inside of society. And so I think there's so much to learn from all aspects as we try and build community, and that's really what Healthy Heart Nation is about. And
So let,
obviously the forefront is nutrition, but there's other components too as
well,
well.
let me take that a step further, because I know this is something that's important to you, and it is to me. And I know you're making a lot of inroads into addressing it. And that is, as you talk about the different levels of society, the disenfranchised groups, and so on, we know of this incredible racial disparity in problems of obesity and heart disease and diabetes and things of that nature, especially in African American and Latino populations. And
Yes.
so I know you talk about this whole area that we call slave food that you've talked about, and food deserts and swamps. Let's get into that just a little bit, because that speaks
Yeah.
to the social injustice and the economic repression that unfortunately feeds some of that disparity to a great extent. And I think that's an elephant in the room that too often is not even addressed. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, we understand. I think the wonderful work of science, this is why we can never separate ourselves from science, has really revealed that we're much more alike than we are dislike, right? And so we understand that there is one race, which is the human race. But unfortunately, race has taken on more of a social construct, right? In part because we naturally are inclined to move and drive ourselves towards individuals who mirror ourselves, either in appearance or either in profession or finances or whatever it may be. And what this has done is it's created segments of our community, of our population, of our culture that are lacking in terms of resources. And so it's created these areas, these pockets, these crucibles of stress that are impacted by perhaps stereotypes. They're impacted by the business of business's business, which means they flood these areas with high levels of toxic foods, of highly processed, refined, sugar-filled foods. They aren't forcing anyone to eat it, but when you confront someone where the images that they see on a regular basis just driving down the road are all the foods that they shouldn't eat, that now they magnify that with advertisements that are bombarded, right, by television ads, by social media ads, by all these things of that nature, that now all of a sudden it embeds and seeps into the thought process that this is what I need to have. Then when you layer that with government subsidies that drive the price low and make it easily attainable, and then you add the stress component, that now I'm looking to get some relief from a day's stress of trying to struggle to find a job, or perhaps struggling to deal with other social issues that are going on. So now I eat this bite of whatever it is that causes a surge of dopamine just for me to drive and get it, gives me this temporary serotonin release, but causes a host of harm in my body that I'm not aware of because it's not happening instantaneously. And I can have more and more and more as I want it. There's a major problem in our society when this is the case. It's a major problem when because I have achieved a certain financial status, that if I want one of those things, my kids we have to drive further distance.
Right.
I don't want it. That's not in my neighborhood. Why is it fair that other individuals, they're surrounded by it, they're encamped by it, they're prisoners to it, whereas others are not at all? I'll never forget going and so they call these areas food deserts, which means, and some actually don't like, they eschew that name, food deserts, because it implies that it's a natural occurrence. And they prefer food apartheid states, where, because it was created somehow in terms of structuring, when you look historically, in terms of the lack of grocery stores or fresh fruits and vegetables that may be available, and the overabundance or swamps of poor nutritional food and nutritious foods. And so as a result of all these things, when you look, there's a major issue that's inside of our society right now. I think it's spilled over. It's beyond a race issue. It's now a financial, as we look at the homelessness inside of America. That supersedes anything in terms of race. As we look at rural areas that may be predominantly Caucasian in certain pockets, that we see that this really eliminates that issue of race. And so we're having the haves and the have-nots. I'll never forget going on vacation with my kids, and literally I had some of the most expensive grocery stores literally within stone's throw of each other. 3, 4 expensive, beautiful grocery stores. It's almost like you walked into the Garden of Eden, with the fruits and vegetables so ripe and large and everything. You walk inside, you drive to another neighborhood, and they look like they were thrown on the ground and stepped over. And the expense is even higher than in others. So there's a major issue that's happening inside the United States. And I think that I don't think that the movement towards vegan fast food options is the answer. It's not the answer.
No, it's not
It's
the
not the
answer, because
answer.
we know that the quality of those are not really supporting high level health. But the way I
Not at
look at
all.
it, though, is we're at a point where there's such a pressure environmentally for staying with
Yes.
the typical ways that people eat. If I can bring anybody into the fold in any way I can, because as you know, not everybody's ready to make that quantum
No.
leap into being perfection. I always tell people sometimes you got to teach people where they are a lot of the time so you don't turn them off. So again, those are not ideal, but I see how they can be a gateway into at least bringing people into the fold.
Yes.
And sometimes you have to do that. And I think we're at a point now with such a pressure for extinction and environmental change and so on,
Yes.
that consciousness has to be part of it. We've got to make a move because time is running out. There's not, people think it's an endless reservoir of time to make these changes, and there really isn't.
Oh,
Let me ask you a question. Because of that pressure that we've just talked about, does the organization you have, I mean, how do you deal with that on a grassroots level? How do you feel, you can act locally to start shifting that, because we can't deal with it totally globally? So what's the kind of ways that you see your organization, let's take the Healthy Heart organization, how does that work in a grassroots way to kind of address that disparity that we've talked about?
oh, great question. And so first, let me dovetail back, and I'll tell you what I always tell every patient. So when I'm in the hospital, I'm taking care of a patient with acute heart attack who's a heavy smoker. I don't give them a cigarette, obviously, inside the hospital. But what do I put on them? I put a nicotine patch.
Right.
Why do I do that? To help their addiction. Is it good for them? No. Is it better than? It is. But I'm not getting secondhand smoke. It's not combustible with the oxygen. And
Right.
it's a transition, not for them to stay on forever indefinitely, but a transition. And it definitely is better than. And so I just wanted to add that to that. But
Yeah.
with the Healthy Heart Nation, what I'll tell you, that one of the major issues with the Healthy Heart Nation for grassroots. So for example, what we've done is we've taken barbershops and beauty salons, trusted locations where people feel comfortable going into. And there's a wealth of research that's been done to show a benefit by going in and doing blood pressure screenings. Well, that's not my goal, is solely blood pressure screenings. So what we're doing is we're working with Dave Katz's group and Diet ID to go in and really assess individuals' health status in terms of their nutrition. and looking to begin the process of moving them towards an improved state of nutritional health, along with understanding their blood pressure. Now, so you layer that in with people of all different financial backgrounds who are going into barbershops. Now you have what we're doing is we're training high school students. So they learn how to measure the blood pressures, excuse me. They learn how about nutrition too, as well at the same point at this level. Then we're taking these same individuals, these same students, and we're going into churches. Then now you have a different segment of the population that may be
Right.
slightly older and so forth. We're going to beauty salons to address. And so we're trying to bring care to them. If we think of it, medicine is antiquated. We still set up our shop and expect people, it's starting to change. Obviously, the pandemic forced this to happen, but we still force people to come in from 9 to 5. Whereas everything else, Instacart, food delivery, everything brings it to people where they're at. We have to transition and change our perspective to bring the information to people where they're at in a trusted environment where they feel comfortable. I was just inside of a barbershop this past weekend with another colleague, and we were doing some screenings and so forth there. And what's so interesting is they called me over. Now, this is a little gender bias. My colleague, she's exceptional. She's on the she is an associate clinical professor, and they said, "Doc, come over." They're like, "No, you stay over there." They wanted to talk to me about male issues, about erectile dysfunction. And we start having a conversation about nutrition, having a conversation about the perilous effects of blood pressure and how nutrition can impact that. And bring it down along with, sleep and exercise and things of that nature. And so it was a good conversation as a start amongst 10 individuals right there of differing ages. Where can you get that? Where
Right.
now they're getting clinical information and they're comfortable. We're joking, we're laughing, and everything else like that. That's what it's about. That's the grassroots level of making a change. Now, each of those individuals, now they go and they spread the message out there and letting folks know you got to come to this barbershop and this is what you need to learn and so forth there. So
Well,
that's what we're doing that process.
well, I got a good delivery system for you then. Instaheart. How about that? Instaheart.
I
Bring
like
it,
that. I like it. That's
bring it
right.
to the people. Let me ask
That's
you
right.
something else that comes up with vegans a lot. And as a cardiologist and a person that is involved with endothelial health and circulatory
Yes.
benefit and all of that, and we know from a lot of research how the vegan and plant exclusive way of eating really can reverse and prevent some of those problems. But we know that cholesterol, for example, is very, in a way, genetically determined in terms of production individually. It can be affected by oxysterols in food and other things, but there are people who seem to naturally produce higher levels of cholesterol, even people who have embraced being pretty rigorous plant-based people. And so one of the arguments that comes up is that because the bigger problem is not just cholesterol, it's the oxidized free radical form that can play a role in damaging endothelium and promoting inflammatory change and atherosclerotic plaquing. That if you're eating a plant based diet that is so high in antioxidants, is there a leeway for people that are natural producers of cholesterol to not go on statins or to be treated medically because they have the plant based protection? Or do you feel that if it's high enough, you've just got to do something to bring it down? I'm just curious about what your opinion is about that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. A very common approach question I get. And so my approach is this is that I have to inspect what I expect as much as possible. What do I mean by that? Well, I want to track what the inflammatory markers are. So, yes, I'll have their generic cholesterol profile. But if they're eating healthfully, now I want to know what is their C-reactive protein. I may want to know what is their ApoB level that's there right now at this point. Is it high or is it low in that saying? What's your small dense LDL if I get hold of that? Now, if I see that their C-reactive protein markers of inflammation are still quite high, despite, well, now I have concerns, right? In this regards. And so that may shift. And then we have a discussion once again about what do you want, right?
Right.
What do you want? What's your why? And the question is, what am I seeing you for? Am I seeing you because of a prior event that you've already had? And we're trying to stave off a second or third event, understanding that a third of all the heart attacks that happen are second and third of recurrent heart attack that happen annually in the United States. Are we trying to prevent that? Or are we just trying to prevent your first heart attack? or are we dealing with something else like blood pressure or in a regular heartbeat? And so I think we look at everything in the context of an individual along with their goals to make a decision that's individual. But I don't make a broad sweeping statement of no statins or either all statins for everyone. I think it
Right.
is such an individual scenario that's there. And I think as there's obviously a hot topical area is LP low A. And so even before that, there was not much we could do. We knew niacin might bring it down a little bit. We were like, well, I'm not sure. It's just a marker. We see it elevated, but not much we can do. Now we're seeing that there are some therapies that are out there, but we also have seen some small studies, like
Right.
say Houston, showing that you can drive down the LP low A, ApoB, and others. And so most of those studies that have been done looking at pharmaceuticals are not in individuals who've gone aggressive from a nutritional standpoint to really be able to demarcate them. So I always tell individuals, we're dealing with a long-term outcome. That means that we have 3 months, 6 months to really drive the ball forward in terms of your nutrition and reassess where you're at and make a decision. And if you've maximally put in all the effort and this is something you can sustain and it drives it down, then we're good to go.
Right.
If it's something that you feel individually you're not ready to do yet, despite our support, then we have that discussion about other options, once again, about what you want in order to maximally protect you.
Yeah, another controversy that came up that I wanted to address just briefly, because when those heart reversal programs were set in motion by Esselstyn and Ornish and all of that, you and I know they were both very low fat, no animal fat. So what happened is it kind of left in the mind of many people that fat, even whole food fat, became the villain of the story. When in fact, people like, Dr. Esselstyn may not, because he deals with such a population, may not even recommend nuts or avocado or things of that nature. But the truth is, there are studies that suggest that, consistent nut consumption can improve cardiac, mortality and all of that. And then they're a very healthy thing. So I think it's important for people to realize the same thing, that when a study is done that shows something, the fact of the matter is the routine use of whole foods, even including a certain amount of fat from nuts and avocado, albeit small amounts because they're so calorie dense, will have health benefits. And I see sometimes such anxiety even in the so-called vegan population because they're freaked out about eating any fat, and I think that becomes problematic. So how do you weigh in on the role of healthy plant fats in the big picture of things?
No, I'm right in line with what you just mentioned. I think that first we're obligated to number one follow the science as best as possible, and we understand that it can be murky in many situations. But we're not having any big avocado come out to
Right.
try to support avocado papers or a big walnut industry coming out. And so when we look at these epidemiological studies or the smaller studies looking at endothelial function, flow mediated dilatation or brachial reactivity, and we're seeing that there is indeed a benefit that's there in comparison, I think we have to take that to heart. Now, I think the key thing is you have many people who are snackaholics and former sugarholics like myself, right? And so what that means is we're not saying break open a can of whatever your favorite nut vendor is that has butter toffee peanuts or has salt, oil, and sugar, or it's candy covered, and you're going to go through a whole entire can and saying, hey, toxic nuts are good for me. No, we're talking about raw unsalted nuts
Right.
or whatever that you roast yourself. And we're talking about, a few tablespoons or whatever else, 1.5 ounces or so of walnuts, Brazil nuts, because you look at the omegas that are provided are extremely beneficial and powerful that you need it. So my recommendations to patients is that I probably dissuade them from snacking on them and more encourage them to maybe sprinkle it on top of their cereals, their salads, things of that nature, perhaps a sauce. Makes more sense, so you're able to control, unless you're someone like a good friend of mine. He can literally have 4 nuts and be satisfied, not touch anything else. That's not me personally.
Right.
So I figure more people are probably like me than they are not like me.
It's like the old line, if you could have moderated it, you would have. That's the
That's
problem,
right.
and most people don't. So as we wind this down, do you have anything you'd like to share with the audience out here? Some final words.
Well, I have decided to throw my hat in the fray like probably everyone else and write a book. It's my own kind of holistic approach towards health, and it's entitled Selfish, right? A cardiologist cured for a stressed and broken heart. And so I'm working on that book actively right now between things. I actually, you, Frank, are such an important person. I took myself away from this week I dedicated to working on the book to come in and chat with you because I just had to. I mean, you're a phenomenal person, a phenomenal speaker. You've done such tremendous work in this area. And so I cherish the opportunity to come on. And this is long overdue, but that's what's coming up. And so I encourage you, go to the website, sign up just to receive like an ebook and put yourself on the list. And when the book hits, you'll get first notice so you're aware. And I'd love for you to kind of get this book and support it. All the proceeds are going to go to the nonprofit to further this work because it takes all of us. Right. My wife has a great analogy as it relates to the nonprofit. And she's like, listen, the goal of it is from justice, from business, from education, from health, from community. If we all lift a corner of that table, it's easier to move it.
No
but
question.
If one person's trying to do it, it's virtually an impossible task. And so it takes all of us at the table from different aspects, reaching different people in different ways to deliver this message of health and transform our society.
I can't thank you enough. I'm incredibly grateful that you took this time to share your words, your wisdom, and your heart with us, really, truthfully. And I encourage all our people out there that are watching this, please follow Dr. Batiste. His website will even be in our show notes, so you'll see it there too. And I also want to thank everybody out there for joining us. Without you, we can't do any of this. And I encourage you and thank you for being part of this very active, healthy community. And on behalf of the National Health Association, I want to thank you for joining us. My name is Dr. Frank Sabatino, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Health Science Podcast. You've been listening to the Health Science Podcast, brought to you by the National Health Association. Thank you for joining us today and for your commitment to evidence-based health science that backs a whole food, plant-exclusive lifestyle and contributes to the well-being of all people, animals, and our environment. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino. Be sure to leave a rating and a review, and we'll see you on the next show.